Hi everyone and welcome for this how to paint quickly the Undead will come from Heroclash. Heroclash is going to be on game on tabletop for crowdfunding. Will start the 2 April and end on 11 April. So Happy Games Factory give me these 3 miniatures who will be the starter set for the Undead. And I'm going to show you how to paint these small minis. So I start by using my airbrush to push my first highlight on the 3 different miniatures. The basic color is a monster brown from Army Painter. I use the spray to put my base at the beginning. And now I'm going to push in the first time I show you some airbrush highlights with directly the color Flesh 2 from Procolor, and now I had a little bit more white on my airbrush to push the second highlight. The way I'm going to paint the minis is for a tabletop level. The goal is to have some nice miniatures, but with not taking too much time on it. So I use now directly some white, and I'm going to focus this white on some few points of highlight to create my contrasts on the bone and on the non-metallic metal. Now I'm going to use some strong tone. You can use some dark tone or strong tone from Army Painter to put into all my recesses to create and to have more volume on the mini. I'm going to make the same step on all the different miniatures, so sometimes I will skip some parts on some miniatures, but this is exactly the same step I'm going to put on the 3 different minis. After this step I'm going to wait to be sure that all the ink is totally dry, and I'm going to start the next step after. I'm going to put different color like purple, a very dark purple on some of the clothes, as you can see, to create a very clear contrast between the clothes and the bone. As you know, I always use the side of my brush to reach more large parts and to have a better and more clean effect on all the miniatures. You will have more clean and more quick effect if you use the side of your brush and not only the end of the brush. After that, I'm going to use directly some ivory to push highlights on all the bone parts. So that's going to create a very clear contrast between my very clear bone and the clothes will be very more dark. As you can see, this is very some few points of highlights, but that make a huge difference. And I make the same on the non-metallic metal parts. I'm going at the end to put more rust with some orange into my non-metallic metal parts to make a clear distinction between my non-metallic metal parts and the bones, who actually have exactly the same kind of treatment. But just by adding some different color at the end, you can make a big difference between two elements. As you can see, I push a lot of white on every edges to have a very important contrast on my non-metallic metal parts. The point of light is always pretty important to have a nice contrast. So now I'm going to mix my purple color with some ivory to push my first highlights on the closes. This new way to make my tutorial, it's a little bit more long, but if you want, you can accelerate it, or you can just switch on the part you prefer. So don't hesitate to tell me in the comments if you like that, if you will prefer more short tutorial, that's possible too. I propose to all my Patreon some special video. For example, the last one is about the OSL, so other source lightning, and a new one will be about the copper in non-metallic metal. So now I'm going to use some Fur Brown to push the color on all the on the leather. And now I'm going to push more and more highlights on the closes just by adding a little bit more ivory into my color. I decided to not push too much ivory just to be sure there are no mix between the brown and the purple. So now I push, as I explained before, some orange to create my rusts into my very old metal. So this is the first minis, and as you can see, with some very simple methods, you can have miniatures already painted very quickly. The miniatures were sculpted by Victor Aguilar, and he's very talented. These miniatures is pretty easy to paint. As you can see, I'm going to put more and more orange because it's not very it's not a color very covering, so I need to put them a lot of time and very diluted. So I'm going to push more shadow into my closes just by adding into the recesses some dark sea blue. So let's go for the second succulent Undead, and now I directly use my ivory to push every bounce to white. So this is the first resin casts Happy Games Factory that will be this kind of resin casts into the boxes. There are some few changes to be sure that will be well molded, but you can see the different model. I'm going to push the highlight to focus on some few parts. As I explained, the method is exactly the same than the first minis, but you can see the different movements and the different application of paint depending of on the surfaces I'm going to touch. So every closes is going to be in purple. I'm going to add more and more rust too. As you can see, there are very less very less purple parts on this mini, so it's pretty quick. Don't hesitate to put me a comment with all your question. I use Raphael 8404 as a brush, and my airbrush is an Evolution 2-in-1. So it's pretty easy to find it on some different website. I put my highlights on the closes just by adding once again a little bit ivory into, and push on every edges more and more highlight. And more I'm going to push highlight, more I'm going to add ivory into my purple. Here we go. I push a little bit more dark sea blue on some side. Sorry about the movement. And now I push a little bit more black into every recesses to create more and more contrasts. So now I start the character from this band, and I put some black on every armor surfaces. This will be a good distinction from the basic skeleton from these characters. In Heroclash you just play from 1 to 3 minis, so it's pretty easy to start playing. And your hero, so this is a skeleton hero, is going to use some cards just as equipment, like a shield or a special axe, or you can use some partner like the skeleton I already paint. So it's pretty easy. And now I'm going to put the different color, like the fur brown on every leather parts, and the purple on every clothes. Now I start to push my highlights with my ivory on all non-metallic metal parts, like the skulls on the face. Like I do before, I'm going to push the highlight on every edges. The armor is there are a lot of detail on the armor, so I'm going to use the side of my brush to really just put my color on, and that's going to create a non-metallic metal effect very easily. So as you can see, I'm going to put just some highlight and just some points of color. I decided to have a more dark non-metallic metal color on these minis, just to make a contrast between this hero and the small acolyte they have. So as you can see, after a first point of light, I come back with some more diluted color to create my transition. I push on every edges of the sword some white. And I'm going to push more highlights on the purple just by adding a little bit more ivory. And step by step, I'm going to push always a little bit more ivory. I will never use just some pure ivory on the clothes, just to make a distinction between the highlight on the clothes and the highlight on the non-metallic metal. Just to be sure to have a nice and good distinction between my different parts. I will be present at Adepticon, so I'm going to give some masterclass of painting, so don't hesitate to come visit and show me the mini you paint. That will be a pleasure to give you some advice. So here is the step now. The different color is already pushed, and I come back with some dark sea blue to push my shadow on the leather and on the clothes. Take care about the dilution, because the dark sea blue color from Prince August is pretty is very covering, so don't hesitate to dilute a lot. I make the same on the back of that part. And I'm going to add a little bit fur brown just right here to create a transition and more deep effects on this part. As you can see, the minis is pretty easy to paint, and it's a real pleasure to push more and more small point of white to create a better contrast or better effect. Don't hesitate to support Happy Games Factory on this game on tabletop crowdfunding. It will be from 2 April to 11 April. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial video. Thank you very much for seeing this tutorial. Don't hesitate to subscribe to the channel, post a comment, and support me on Patreon. See you soon.